Welcome to our symposium on a strategic multi-scale approach for managing threats to sagebrush ecosystems based on resilience and resistance concepts. I'm Jean Chambers. I'm a research ecologist with Rocky Mountain Research Station, USDA Forest Service, and I'm located here in Reno. I'm going to be your moderator for the session. Karen Prentice is going to kick us off this morning. She is the Healthy Lands Coordinator for the Bureau of Land Management in Washington, D.C. She's a perfect person to begin by talking about addressing management need for coordinated and collaborative strategic conservation and restoration investments in the sagebrush biome.
Thank you very much, Jane. And for those of us who are in the room, just a reminder, if it's not clear, that everything is being recorded today, so please be very careful and remember that. It also means that we're going to be very attentive to staying on time, and so I've got somebody in the front row who's going to let me know when I stray from that. But I wanted to say how happy I am to be here today. This has been the result of many years of work, not only with the team that we're working with today, but also with other folks who have come before us. And so I'm excited about that. My co-author for this particular presentation is Ken Mayer, who isn't able to be here today. But we've also got a huge team of other folks from a variety of federal and state agencies, NGOs, and individuals actually who have come out of retirement to help us with our peer review process. So I'm very grateful for that. This is Ken. He tells me he has a good reason for not being here today, and I really do choose to believe that. But he and I were talking the other day, and he told me a story about a friend of his who was here from Namibia, or was a couple of weeks ago. And Ken was trying to explain the type of work that we've been doing and why it's important. And I bring this story up today because that friend ended up saying, that has value for me. Even though I've never heard of a sage grouse, or a sagebrush ecosystem, I'm still interested in what we can do to make science intelligible so that we can bring folks together so that they work together in the same direction. Here in the US, though, we do have sagebrush here, and going up into Canada, it used to be a dominant part of the ecosystem on over 153 million acres of ground. We've lost about 60% of that to various disturbances, and much of the remainder has been altered. The loss of that ecosystem threatens the human communities that depend upon it and the lifestyles that depend upon it. It also affects more than 350 plant and animal species that make use of the community. So lots of folks have asked over the years, is there anything we can do about that? And folks have taken a lot of steps to try to make action about it. One thing is that they've tended to focus on individual species. There have been many, many petitions for listing of individual species. Here is a few of them that have come up, and you can see multiples of these have been listed or proposed, and then the petition will be sent forward again. So it's not just 5 or 6 species, it's 15 or 20 times. And you need to really think about the level of staff and effort that goes into dealing with each of these from across all of our partners, and also the level of uncertainty that it puts out into the community when we've got potential listing decisions. If current trends in habitat loss and degradation are not reversed, we really do expect to see more listing decisions in the future, or petitions, and that species by species approach is just not sustainable. It takes time, money, and other resources. By focusing on just one species, we can lead to damaging or ignoring other important values. So what we need to do is think about an ecosystem conservation strategy instead of a species conservation strategy. We need to think about the stage and not the dancers on the stage. It's a more sustainable solution because there's too many species. So we need to evaluate and take a look at how all of those individual plans for the individual species add up. How do they protect the other sagebrush-dependent species that they weren't written for? What's the degree to which existing conservation measures are likely to fall short of our needs for other species that we don't have the science and know enough about today, but also for the ecosystem in a whole? And we need to think about whether or not manipulations that we are putting in place to benefit one species could potentially harm others. So it's not the time to go it alone. And this was really the outcome of, this particular slide was the outcome of that conversation with Ken, because he was specifically talking about firefighting and fire suppression. And his friend from Namibia said, we don't have government that goes out and does our fire suppression. It's all landowners. But our landowners still need to work together. And they can use this kind of approach where we've had some conversations about what's important to us and what's at risk to coordinate their actions when they are out on the ground. So collaborative conservation is really, really important, and we've been talking about it around the West for decades. It's not a new concept, but what is new are some of the tools that we're coming up with that can help us in our efforts of collaborative conservation. But whatever the tools are, the human relationships, the organizations, and the social networks, the people are what makes this work. Some of us were talking the other day about some of the challenges and the changing direction that we see within the federal agencies right now, as there's been such a shift in federal policy over the last year or so. And that shift is proper and it's happening. We can work through some of that uncertainty that comes at any transition like that because of personal relationships. Those personal relationships are make so much of this actually work. So find friends, food, field, and talking. That's really the solution to a lot of what we're doing. We had a meeting a little over a year ago in Denver that WAF was sponsored to talk about the kickoff to a sagebrush conservation workshop and strategy. There's a picture of that there. I'm sorry, Dave, this is an old shot, but we spent a lot of time in the field, whether it's in classes and training and tech transfer, or actually out looking at particular projects that are of interest. But that time in the truck or eating dinner is also equally important. Use that time to come to a shared understanding. Think about the values that we share and make sure that those values are all on the table. If we only work with just a few of us, we can often miss values that are important to our friends and neighbors. So we need to think about them all. Think about the risks to those values and how the land itself and the resource itself or the social system is going to respond to disturbance and management activities. Put those together, in our case, to think about identifying conservation and restoration opportunities, and then prioritize and plan. The tool that we're here to talk about today is the science framework. It was written in 2 parts, one of which has been published, and the other which will be coming shortly. We're going to spend our morning session, the early part, talking about the technical piece, which is part 1, the science basis. Has a primary emphasis on sagebrush ecosystems and greater sage-grouse populations, because that's the kind of work that we've been doing here in the West in the last few years. But it's called a framework specifically because we can add other resource values to the framework as we develop the science to come along. So for example, when we have enough information about pygmy rabbit can be dropped into this information. As interest in migratory corridors and mapping of migratory corridors increases, those layers can be added to this document. It's a framework, and it will be updated in the future with this other information. Likewise, as new science emerges, it will continue to be updated. The second piece, so a little bit more detail on part 1. It contains both text and data. The first part, the text, discusses the current condition of the sagebrush biome, threats to sagebrush ecosystems. It's really founded on resilience and resistance concepts. Our next speaker, Gene Chambers, will talk about that a great deal, but it's easy to say resilience and resistance as a phrase that you don't really parse out and think about, and I would urge you not to do that. And during Gene's section, really think about what do those 2 phrases mean and what do they imply about the ecosystems. We crosswalk the resistance and resilience with species habitat information and what parts of the habitat are important to the species that we care about. Very importantly, this is built on a multi-scale basis. It's built with information that helps myself and others who work at the national level thinking about where to send funds across the sagebrush biome. It provides information that helps us. It provides information that can help people who are working at a regional level or a state level send funding and resources out to areas on the ground to project areas, and it also provides some step-down information for actual project management on the ground, thinking about what kinds of treatments to put in particular places and why they might be most successful there. I put the link down. This is available through Tree Search, and you can get a copy of it today or access it online. Also, the data layers and the geospatial information that are used in this are available today, both through USGS Science Basis and also through the Bureau of Land Management's Landscape Approach Data Portal. I'd like to just mention that the only reason this is housed on BLM right now is because we had the capacity when the need for this project came along. It truly has been an interagency effort, and it's just happenstance that you'll be going to a BLM site. You'll be asked to go through and click through a data disclaimer, and then you'll get to a page that gives you access to downloadable data, live map services, some documents, some static maps, and also some other information that the Bureau has made available through our landscape efforts. It's truly a remarkable resource, and I would urge all of you to go take a look at it if you're not familiar with it. Part 2 is something we'll discuss later this afternoon. It's helping us think about, so what does the science mean anyway? Which is always a challenge for managers. The science it sits there, but until we give it some personal meaning and think about what our objectives are and how we might have more than one objective for a particular place, it can be hard to actually use the science. So part 2 will include management applications of the science that was presented in part 1, and it will also include a new section that's trying to present trade-offs to consider when working with multiple objectives. Some of the sections that we'll have and that you'll hear about today: adaptive management and monitoring, climate adaptation, wildlife and vegetation management, non-native invasive plant management. A really interesting piece that I'm very interested in on the National Seed Strategy, livestock grazing management, wild horse and burro consideration, and also integrating the different pieces. I just wanted to point out again that we didn't start from scratch, and at one point I had a slide that had about 40 different projects that led to this effort, and that this effort wouldn't have happened if these other things didn't work. It was just too much. But I went back to this. It's a file photo, obviously, from the 1939 Great Basin Experimental Range, just to highlight how long we've been doing research in the Great Basin and the sagebrush ecosystem, as well as how long people have been working there. But I also like the slide because it shows that our management questions and our approaches have changed through time. We used to ask how to get rid of sagebrush. We don't anymore. But we have, and our information is built on this previous work. There are 3 documents to think about that are linked, and sometimes people get confused. There was a general technical reference that was written for the western part of the range in 2013. That covers fire and invasives as the primary threats. General technical reference 356, or SMART, is in the eastern part of the range. It adds additional threats that are appropriate to the eastern part of the range, such as agricultural conversion. And this one that we're talking about today, the Science Framework Part 1, is General Technical Reference 360. Part 2 does not have a number yet, but it's really important to realize that these are all connected. Moving forward, the science framework will be adopted by WAFA, the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and used as one piece of the information that they consider when they work on their sagebrush conservation strategy. They'll also be looking at some new research that's coming out on human dimensions and picking up an effort that they've been coordinating with Fish and Wildlife on the Sagebrush Science Initiative that's going to help them prioritize the other species that we need information about. All of those will go into the WAFA-led Sagebrush Conservation Strategy. And for those of you who may have heard reference to the Department of Interior's Conservation and Restoration Strategy, those efforts have also been merged. So we'll be heading towards one collaboratively worked on sagebrush conservation strategy. There's another effort I wanted to let you know about. This is just getting kicked off. It's called SageDat. It's a result of some Department of Interior funding that USGS, Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife, and WAFWA put in for. It's helping us move forward with the work that we've done on geospatial and data sharing to try to reduce some of those barriers and to provide more user access. We're just getting started, and if you've got questions or suggestions on other team members who should be involved, we would definitely welcome you reaching out to those of us listed at the bottom of the slide. And I wanted to end with this as my placeholder for Jean to come up, or any questions, Hannah, however. Okay, so I'll take questions from those in the room if there are any.